And now, the presenter of Insight, Jenny Brockie.
It's our last show of the year, and what better to do on Melbourne Cup Day than throw you a bit of a mind bender. Tonight, we're talking about the human brain, what intelligence actually is, and whether you can make yourself smarter. Ever since scientists embraced the idea of brain plasticity, that you can teach old dogs new tricks, there's been debate about what it means for intelligence and learning. So, how do our brains work? Is there a cost to being smart? And should we even try to be smarter? That's what we're talking about tonight, and don't forget you can follow us on Twitter. Welcome everybody, very intimidating audience I have here tonight, I have to say. Tiara, let me start with you. You have an IQ which is in the top 2% of the population. What do you think intelligence is?
Oh, a lot of that really depends on how you define intelligence.
How do you define it?
I think for me, intelligence would be the ability to grasp a topic or to grasp a concept, and then also the ability to make use of it. So I subscribe to the Garner theory of there being multiple intelligences, the 8 intelligences, kinetic and visual and language intelligence. Like, people are intelligent in different ways.
So can you when you say grasp something, you mean grasp it quickly? Or do you mean just grasp it in a total way? And can you grasp anything like that quickly, or do you have a particular type of intelligence, do you think?
I tend to be a pretty quick learner, but I think I do better with things that involve creativity, because I enjoy that sort of thing, lateral thinking, creative stuff, and especially things that I can experiment and be hands-on with. That sort of thing I grasp better than, say, if someone had just told me a million facts.
Okay, Joel, what about you? You're a physicist in Brisbane. You also have an IQ in the same range as Tiara. What do you think? What do you think intelligence is?
Yeah, I go for a similar sort of answer, that it's the ability to grasp new things and but also to synthesise information, so being able to perhaps combine facts in new ways, and to be able to not just, any computer can do some far quicker than we can, but it's being able to look for new theories and explain things.
So what can you do that other people can't do, and what makes you feel different?
Well, I don't know if I can do anything that no one else can do. Obviously I have a strong maths background, and I enjoy working with maths, but I guess I'm in the minority of physicists in that I'm quite diverse. I do a lot of public speaking, I do stand-up comedy and various other things. So I like being diverse, and I like to sort of use all of those sort of aspects.
Okay, do you use your brain in distinctly different ways for those things? Like when you're doing stand-up compared to when you're being a physicist, do you sense that you're using your brain in a very different way?
Actually, not so much. I think that, like, when I do a lot of communicating, I am thinking very analytically about the audience. They laughed at that, they didn't laugh at that, or they're sort of nodding at that, I need to explain that a little bit better. So I guess I'm still fairly analytical the whole way, even though I'm sort of doing that more creative kind of side.
Okay, so it's analytical rather than instinctive. You're not reacting instinctively, you're actually working it all out.
I think I've trained myself to react instinctively. So I've thought a lot about what the underlying things are, and then, now I don't think about it consciously on the fly, but I think that's what I'm doing underneath.
Okay, Simon, what about you? You're a Rhodes Scholar and a former Olympian, which is an interesting combination. What do you think intelligence is?
Well, like others, Jenny, I think it's one form of intelligence is the ability to reason and to argue, and to take ideas and structure them in a way that you can actually, I guess, convey to others. I think that part of it we haven't touched on, which is the communication side of intelligence, which is, it's one thing to be analytical, but the other thing is, I guess, in a workplace setting, which where I work, the ability to actually communicate to others and convince them of your arguments, and think about different points of view and put it all together into a compelling argument.
And do you think intelligent people, very smart people, are, in general, good at communicating with others? Or do you think they live inside their heads a bit more?
I think it does vary. I've met many very, very intelligent people who are poor communicators. So it's not a given that if you are highly intelligent in that form of intelligence, then you necessarily communicate in the same sort of way.
So did you? I'm interested in how you very smart people use your brains. Did you use your intelligence in Oxford, when you went to Oxford, in a different way to the way you used it when you were hurdling, when you were an Olympian?
I had a little bit more time on my hands in Oxford than I did in the running track. So, in a sense, yes, it was very. My event was the 400-metre hurdles, and you basically got 49 seconds to run your race, and it's a very technical event. And so you do need to think very quickly. A lot of that is through training and development, in the same way you can train your brain. In Oxford, in one sense, when I turned up to Oxford, I actually was quite intimidated because I felt highly or less intelligent than a lot of the people I was rubbing shoulders with. So it was quite an instructive sort of environment to learn.
Okay, I wanted to talk to you too, Wayne, because you're in the BRW Young Rich list, which means you're successful in business. Is that because of intelligence or something else?
Well, I think that's part of it, but I think in business you've got to learn to adapt very quickly, and I think why I've been successful is I think I learnt early on what my talents are and what I'm good at, and I've been able to use that in the business field, and I think that's made a difference. And I think, to me, intelligence is knowing what you are good at and what talents you have, and being able to utilise them to their full
Okay,
extent.
so it's also about knowing your limits, presumably, as well as your strengths.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Tim Hannon, you're a clinical psychologist. You've worked in the area of IQ. What do you think intelligence is? Because it's a really interesting area to try to define. What do you think it is?
I think it's a rough term for a range of abilities that include all the things that have been mentioned here. Definitions are difficult to come by, but it's about being able to deal effectively with your life, deal effectively with the challenges that are before you, select the opportunities that you wish to pursue, identify what you need to do in particular situations to respond to that. There is no single definition that I think has a great deal of consistent agreement among researchers and clinicians.
Okay, is that right, Michael? Because we've just heard a psychologist talking. You're a neuroscientist. Do you agree with what Tim's saying, or do you have a different view as a neuroscientist?
No, I'd have to agree with Tim that consensus definition continues to elude scientists, and I think just the introduction today has shown that everyone has a slightly different bent on intelligence, and it seems to be ideas which flatter oneself, because often people define intelligence with respect to how they view how intelligent they are themselves.
Yeah, what they're good at.
Exactly.
Essentially. So that's being
it becomes
smart.
really
is what you're good
vital
at.
from a science point of view to try and come up with ways to get a handle on it. In my work, I try and avoid the term intelligence altogether. I deal mainly with older people. And we know that with ageing there's a general decline in cognitive abilities. And so I find it much more useful to talk about discrete cognitive abilities rather than intelligence, because scientists can't agree with it. Scientists can't agree with the general community.
All right, we're going to talk about intelligence because discrete cognitive abilities is a bit of a mouthful. So are you quite happy to, accept that for the purposes of this discussion we'll talk about intelligence with your definition in mind? Can you take us through this picture of the brain here in the different sections? Can you talk us through those and what those different colours represent?
No problem. If we start at the back, which is towards the left-hand side, in the dark blue, that's called the occipital lobe, and that's got to do with everything about the visual world, so processing visual information. Underneath that, in the greys, the cerebellum, which has been called a mini brain. It's huge, proportionally speaking, in the rat, and the cerebellum is essential to coordination of our body and learning motor function. On the side of the brain, which would be along the side here, is called the temporal lobe in the purpley pink colour, and the temporal lobe is critical to memory. In the green, which is at the top in the back half of the brain, is called the parietal lobe, and that's a bit of a jack of all trades of the brain. It's involved in all parts of cognitive function, particularly keeping focused on different tasks. And then you can see very strikingly that the front of the brain, which is called the frontal lobe, obviously, takes up so much of the human brain, and that's because the frontal lobe is really what makes us unique from all the other animals. The frontal lobe is involved what we call executive function. So that's about planning our behaviour, planning our actions, inhibiting inappropriate reactions and impulses, and also problem solving. So a lot of the theme that people brought up at the beginning was about problem solving and being able to tackle complex issues. the frontal lobe is quite important in that regard.
Okay. Tim, how accurately does an IQ test measure intelligence? Because I'm sure that's a question a lot of people are wondering about.
Contemporary IQ tests have a very high degree of accuracy in that if we administer a number of different IQ tests to the same person, we tend to get the same results. And if we administer an IQ test to the same person over a period of time, we tend to get about the same sorts of scores. So in terms of the way they're constructed, they're reasonably accurate.
So who are the people with the high IQs then?
Here or
No, in general. In general, I mean, can you draw a picture for us of the people with the high IQs? That they are people who ...
In general, a high IQ is associated with desirable professions. So there are certain professions in which you are more likely to see people with higher levels of IQ. For example, any profession which requires university study for a period of years, you're likely to see a higher proportion of people with higher IQs in those professions.
But not celebrities, presumably, because that's desirable for a lot of people these days.
I think a fair reading of the last couple of pages of any of the Sunday papers, whether it be the sports section or the fashion pages, would probably bear out.
Be careful about the sports section. You've got someone over here who's a Rhodes Scholar. I think you need to just be a bit careful there. Con, what can IQ predict then?
Look,
apart from the fact that they're likely to do well in a profession if they choose to,
yeah.
or...
Well, I think IQ has been one of the most successful paradigms in psychology. I just wanted to add that because it has been shown to predict a whole lot of really important real-life criteria. So they predict what type of job you get. They predict essentially the income that you may receive. They also predict various health-related issues. And more recent research is now showing conclusively that they actually predict your longevity and how long you might live.
That's interesting. So you can live longer?
That's right. So it's some of the research that's coming out of Scotland and Europe, for instance, looking at these very large longitudinal databases, are showing that basically the higher IQ, the longer that you live, and probably the second most important predictor after whether you smoke or not, cigarettes, is your IQ. So.
And why?
We don't know the answer to that, but obviously,
this is the story of the brain, isn't it? I mean, it's not your fault, Con. It's not your fault. But it's interesting because so often when you get to the point of wanting to know why, that's where you get stuck.
Well, there's a number of hypotheses, obviously, that perhaps higher IQ people make better decisions about health and lifestyle and how much they drink and a whole lot of those sort of healthy...
Some of them. We'll talk about the downside in a moment, I think, because it's a very rosy picture you're painting here. We've all heard about emotional intelligence, which is called EQ. What is it, and can you test for that?
You certainly can test for it. It's a relatively new area within psychology, but I think it's a very important one because it's about our ability to manage emotions, to understand the emotions of others, to express emotions effectively. And these seem distinct abilities unrelated to IQ that also have predictive power in other ways that IQ perhaps doesn't.
Okay, does it predict as good an outcome as IQ does?
Probably different outcomes. So
how different? What sort of different?
Okay, so your ability to have friends, for instance, to make interpersonal relationships with others is not about your IQ, it's more about your understanding of other people and your interpersonal skills. Your ability to lead other people within, say, a corporate sector has nothing to do with your IQ.
So can you have a really high emotional intelligence and a really low IQ?
Absolutely.
Okay, and can you have a really high IQ and a really low emotional intelligence?
All combinations, and we've seen all those before.
Michael, do you think you can test for emotional intelligence? As a neuroscientist, what do you think of the idea of emotional intelligence?
I have to say it's not really within my area of expertise, so it's difficult for me to sort of wear the neuroscientist hat. I do feel personally that if I describe someone as intelligent, I'm probably making an assessment partly on their cognitive abilities and partly on their social intelligence or their emotional intelligence, how well they can carry themselves in the social world. If you think assessing and measuring intellectual intelligence or cognitive intelligence is fraught, I think measuring emotional intelligence is another step further, because often there's no objective yet right or wrong, where sometimes you ask a panel if it's right or wrong and so forth. So I think it's a different order of difficulty, but I think there's something in it.
There's something in it. All right, Gerald, do you think there's something in it? You're the Victorian representative of Mensa, which is a group that you can only join if you've got an IQ in the top 2% of the population.
Quite a few here who can join.
Yes, quite a few here who can join. Do you think emotional intelligence exists? Do you think it...
I think it is. I think EQ is definitely there. I think it's more vaguely defined compared to IQ. And like rightly said, we've got more tests to assess intelligent questions, but not enough tests for EQ.
So does Mensa value it as highly as it values IQ?
I don't think it values it at all. In terms of membership, we don't assess anyone.
So no one has to have emotional intelligence to join Mensa, is that right?
Well, it's good to have, but we only assess on IQ basis. So, yeah.
Okay, well, coming up, we're going to look at whether you can make yourself smarter. And we're going to meet someone who's taking drugs he believes are